There was a peony bush that grew along the south wall of my grandfather's house, and it was older than he was. I want you to sit with that a moment the way I have had to. A plant older than the man who taught me everything, still throwing out pink flowers every June, thick and heavy with that smell that gets into your memory and never leaves. He used to stand near it in the evening after the chores were done, not saying much, just looking at it the way you look at something that was there before you and will be there after. He told me once that his own grandmother put it in the ground and that nobody living had ever seen that bush as anything but full grown. That is the thing about the right plants. You put them down one time, with care, and they carry on long after your hands have gone stiff. Most folks these days plant the same flowers over and over, spring after spring, hauling home a new flat from the garden store because last year's died on them. My grandfather never worked that way. He said a man who plants the same thing twice wasn't listening the first time. So let me tell you what he listened to. What came back for him year on year without any coaxing. The way he told it to me with dirt still under his nails. Start with the shade. There was a north-facing bed against the old house that never got but an hour of morning sun, and everybody who tried something there watched it sulk and die. My grandfather put a hosta in it, the big kind. The one with leaves the color of new green apples that spreads near 4 feet across if you leave it be. He set it in the dappled light where the morning sun came soft through the maple, gave it water that first summer, and then he did the hardest thing a gardener ever does. He walked away. By the 3rd year it was the size of a wash tub. By the 7th it was the thing every visitor stopped to ask about by name. The thick leaves on that one, the slugs couldn't chew through them the way they turned the thinner hostas into lace by August. It looked the same in September as it did in June. He gave it room, mind you, a good 4 feet clear on every side, because he knew what year 7 looked like and he never once had to move it or split it or fuss over it. Some plants just want to be left alone, and that hosta was the plainest lesson in it. Out front where the sun came full, he kept a run of small yellow daylilies. Not the ones you see planted stiff along every bank and gas station in the country, all the same, like somebody stamped them out of tin. He had a softer yellow, an easier flower, one that bloomed from the end of June clear through to frost without a soul ever going out to pinch the dead ones off. I asked him once why he didn't grow the common kind everybody else did, and he just said the common kind got common because it was easy to sell, not because it was better. His run of yellow was a ribbon by the 5th summer, a solid unbroken line of bloom. In 15 years on it was the same ribbon, never divided, never replanted. He was suspicious of anything that got popular for reasons that had nothing to do with the garden. Near the front of that same sunny bed he grew a salvia, with stems so dark they were near black, and up those stems ran spires of deep violet that stood straight through a hard summer rain, when the softer kinds would flop right over into the path. I remember the bees on it, bumblebees heavy and slow, and something he called a hummingbird moth that came at dusk. That one he cut back hard after the first big flush, and it gave him a second round come September. He planted a clump of it out along his long border, and I want to say that was near 40 years back now, maybe a touch less, and that same clump was still throwing the same violet the last time I stood there. No dividing, no extra water past the first year. It just did the work, quiet, every season. Then there was the catmint, and this is the one my grandmother liked for her tea. A low blue lavender cloud of little flowers that ran near 5 months without stopping, which is a thing almost nothing else in a garden will honestly do. The bees loved it, and the deer wouldn't touch it. And it had a way of quietly filling in every bare spot you forgot to weed. One small plant in the spring would be a 2-foot cloud by fall, and 4 feet across by the 3rd year, but it filled that space by spreading its own clump wide, not by sending runners underground to strangle its neighbors the way some plants do. It stayed where it was put, and just got fuller. My grandmother would run her hand across the top of it walking by, and the whole bed would come up smelling of it. I'll stop here and ask you something, because I am curious the way my grandfather was curious about how things grew in other folks' dirt. Which of these first few is already sitting in your bed right now, and what part of the country are you gardening in? He always said the same plant tells a different story depending on the ground it's standing in, and I have found that to be true. Now there is a stonecrop, the upright kind, with dusty rose flowers that open late in August and hold their color right through the first hard frosts. My grandfather grew a sturdy one, purple tinged in the stem. That never split open in the middle the way the old standard did. That old kind, by its 5th or 6th year, would hollow out in the center and go to a dead ring, and you'd have to cut it hard or dig it out. His didn't. It held its shape 15 years and more. He grew it in lean, dry ground, the kind the seed catalogs would tell you no flower could want, and that was exactly the point. Rich soil and steady water made that plant go floppy and sad. Poor dry soil made it stand up proud. He'd tap his temple and say the plant already knows what it wants. The gardener's whole job is to quit arguing with it. He kept black-eyed Susans, too. Gold ones that bloomed without a pause from the end of June to the frost, and his stayed clean. The common ones most folks grow catch a leaf spot by August that spatters the low leaves brown and ugly even while the flowers keep coming. His had leaves that stayed clean top to bottom, June through October, a little smaller in the flower but more of them, so the whole plant read fuller. The goldfinches came for the seed heads in the winter cold. He'd set them in front of a tall grass, something fine and airy that moved in the wind behind the gold, and that little pairing did the work of a fancy garden plan without a dime spent on one. 2 plants, he'd say, and the border builds its own self. For the coneflowers he had a rule, and he said it was maybe the most important thing he ever learned about growing perennials. Grow the plain one, not the fancy oranges and reds and sunset colors the catalogs put on their covers, because those, he found, wouldn't live 3 winters through. The plain pink-purple native, the one nobody photographs, lived 20 years and passed it in the same spot. It fed every bee and butterfly there was, seated itself gently around the mother clump, and left dried seed heads standing through the winter for the goldfinches to strip when nothing else in the bed was doing a thing. He'd rather have the 9-cent plain one that lived than the fancy one he'd be buying again in 2 springs. He was not a man who liked buying the same thing twice, if you recall. There was a blue geranium, too, a hardy one. A low, sprawling mound of small periwinkle flowers that bloomed from May right through October and wove itself gently in among the taller plants without ever climbing over them or flopping down. He planted his first one expecting an ordinary thing and got, in his words, a 15-year handshake he didn't know he'd agreed to. That first clump stayed at the front of his border and bloomed every year from late May to the frost, never divided, never moved. It just did its work, he said, with something near affection for the man who planted it. I always liked that he talked about his plants that way, like they knew him back. Before I go on to the last few, let me say the plain truth of it. There is more to this than fits in one telling 40-some years of it, and I only have the one evening. If what this old man passed down is worth anything to you, follow along here, because I put out what I can when I can, and it's all the same kind of talk, quiet and practical and meant for folks tired of advice that doesn't match the yard they actually stand in. Now there's a native he grew that hardly anybody asks for by name, a blue star that put out soft sky blue flowers all over its mound late in the spring, then stayed fine textured and green all summer, and then in October turned a clean bright gold you could see from clear across the yard. 2 real seasons of show from the one plant, and it asked for nothing. No water past the first year, and the deer walked right past it. It came up 3 feet and stayed 3 feet for 20 years. He said the first time that fall gold hits you, you'll go and dig up half the bed to plant more, and he was right, because I did exactly that. We are down to the 3 now, and these are the ones that outlive the gardener. Everything up to here keeps a bed alive and lovely through the seasons. These last 3 keep it alive through your life, and your daughter's and hers after that. There is a real difference between a plant that fills a hole this summer and a plant that lays down the bones of a garden for 50 years. And my grandfather knew which was which because he outlived some of his and some of his outlived him. There was a garden phlox he grew, tall near 4 feet, with lavender pink flower heads, and it was the one that scared him worst in his early years. The old unnamed phlox catches a powdery mildew by the middle of July and looks like fire went through it by August. He had a row like that once, along the south side that went to bare sticks by late July, and he dug the whole lot out the next spring and left the bed empty a year while he thought on it. The answer, when he found it, was a clean-leaved kind that held its foliage green from June to October and put out smaller, more numerous flower heads that pulled in more butterflies and hummingbirds per square foot than anything else he grew. He'd plant it in full sun, water it that first summer, and it came back wider and fuller every year for 15, without ever needing split. The whole bed smelled like summer evening the entire time it bloomed, and he'd stand in it just to breathe. The second to last is the blue false indigo, and this is the closest thing to a plant you set down and forget for a quarter century. It's a prairie native, and its root goes down deep, 8 or 10 feet in a few years' time, and once it's down, nothing troubles it. Not drought, not heat, not deer, not disease. Blue spires in late spring, near enough to a lupine that you'd mistake them, except the lupine dies on you in a few years, and this one just keeps on. The flowers turn to black pods that rattle in the autumn wind, and the goldfinches strip them in the cold. 2 things he taught me about it. It takes 3 years to settle, small the first summer, bigger the second, and then suddenly a shrub the third. And once it's down, you leave it, because that deep root won't move after the second year. He'd say the plant picks where it lives, and the gardener only gets to choose the address the one time. And if you know somebody who's been hauling home the same flat of flowers every spring for 20 years, trying to fill the same hole, send this along to them. That's the whole favor. That one thing might break the cycle for the person who's been stuck longest in it. Which brings me back to where I started. The peony. The one along my grandfather's south wall that was older than he was. Planted right, and the depth is the one detail that matters. Just 2 inches under the soil and no deeper. A peony will live 100 years in the same spot and past it. No dividing, no replanting, no feeding after the 3rd year, no fussing. It just gives its flowers every May and June for a century. That bush of his had already lived through more than most people do. It stood through hard winters and lean years, through the passing of the ones who planted it and the folks who came after, through the bed around it being torn up and set again more times than anyone counted. And it was still there, still blooming. The last spring I saw it, pink and double and heavy, with that same smell that gets into a boy's memory and never washes out. That's the whole of it, really. Not a list of plants so much as a way of thinking about time. My grandfather planted things he knew he wouldn't see the end of, and he did it on purpose, because he'd been handed a peony older than himself and understood what it was he'd been handed. So that's my question to leave with you, and I'd truly like to read your answer below. Is there a plant in your yard that somebody planted before your time that you're still tending now? Tell me what it is and who put it there. Those are the stories I hold on to longest.